Welcome back, everybody, for another episode, the second volume in the history of the vampire archetype. So if you didn't catch the first video, you'll definitely want to go back and check that one out. It's on the Lamia. But today we are talking about Strigas, Empusas, and Mormos. Okay, so let's get into it. We're going to start today with the Striga, is the term for, it's a more modern reference given to witches and other malevolent folklore. So originally though, and we're going back to Greek antiquity, we're kind of hanging around in Greece right now with the Lamia and these other creatures that we're going to talk about today. And we will get into other countries. We will get into what you'll find is there are some similarities in these stories from one region to another. So starting today, the Striga is a creature in the form of a bird. It's said to feed on human flesh and blood, and its origins are as early as 100 to 300 AD. There is a reference made in Antoninus Liberalis called Metamorphosis. And that particular text is rather important and something that I will go into more detail when we do the podcast on some of these subjects. That one in particular is a very important story in some of the origins of various creatures and monsters. In this particular writing, there is a reference to Poliphonte and her sons, who they resembled bears, but then they were changed or metamorphosized into birds as a punishment for cannibalism. As we talked about before with the Lamia video, the consumption of flesh, of human flesh and blood, is where we sort of start at the very, very beginnings of creatures that then pass down and till we get to the modern day romanticized vampire. So these are the characteristics we're looking for. We're looking for creatures that consume flesh and blood in various ways. So there is some earlier references, a little bit more ambiguous references in Greek texts and tales. And the first is written in Latin, and it is in a comedy, interestingly, I know, comedy, of Plautus's Pseudolus. And this is from 191 BC. There is a cook, a bad cook, who feeds these people, and the food itself then transforms their bodies into some sort of form that then these bird creatures, these strigas, which are called vampire owls, that devour the diner's guts while they're still alive, just start feeding on their entrails. And so, as I said, this is sort of a little reference that we get earlier on for the strigas and man eating, that then we get to the story from Antoninus Liberalis' Metamorphosis. Somehow these people were transformed from bear-like creatures into birds as a punishment. So there's that. We'll talk more about that in the podcast and get a little more details about that particular story. The next creature I want to talk about is the Empusa. So the Empusa is a female shape-shifting creature. It's described as a phantasma. So this one is not in a corporeal body. It's more of a spirit, which is how it's able to shapeshift. And it's often associated with Lamia and the Mormo, which we'll talk about in just a moment. And like the Lamia, when I talked about it, the Empusa seduces young men for in order to feed on them. There are also mentions of this particular creature possessing a single leg of copper and commanded by Hecate. So here in the picture, you'll see a creature that has that copper leg. So the origins mentioned in a story called The Frogs and another called Ecclesiastes by Aristophanes, and also in Philostratus's Life of Apollonius of Tyana. That particular text is also very important in the bigger picture of various monsters. It was mentioned in the last video with the Lamia, the story of the young woman who gave birth, the baby died, and she turned into the snake-like creature that had to be killed. This is from that same text. So the creature's described as being sent from Hecate and visually transforms from a dog to a beautiful woman to a mule to a bull. And I don't know if that's separate or an amalgamation of all at the same time. Something, again, we'll see if we can get some more info and get some details with the podcast on that one. So visualize that one a little bit. That's pretty funky. So in later, it's described as a ghost or a phantom. Again, we're back to it being a specter of sorts and seducing young men for food. So that is the Empusa. Now the next one is the Mormo. So this is a female spirit as well. So again, another specter, still all within this Greek antiquity. And this one is used as what's called a bugbear. And I mentioned this before, bugbear or a boogeyman, which is used to frighten children into better behavior by telling them that she'll bite them if they're bad. So it's a creature, monster that children are afraid of. Often, you know, the Mormo's going to get you if you're bad. It's going to bite you. And so we'll get a little shot here of the Mormo. It's pretty hideous. So Mormones, the plural, means fearful ones or hideous ones. So as you can see, pretty ugly in this depiction. And again, is also referenced or equivalent to the Lamia or the Empusa. So you'll find references of these that sort of get a little ambiguous or confusing as to which creature we're talking about. They're all kind of in that same world, or reference flesh eating and so forth. And also this one is referenced as commanded by Hecate, similar to the Empusa. Now, the Mormo is mentioned in Book 4, Chapter 35 of Philosophemena of Hippolytus, which is a detailed pyromantic form of divination to invoke Mormo, Gorgo, and Luna. Now, later in the writing, it also is an invocation for Bombo and Hecate. But in this particular part, it's referencing specifically those three, Mormo, Gorgo, and Luna. And I wanted to make a note or make a mention here, something to think about in this particular writing, and something that you will start to commonly see is the mentioning of three names given, particularly in Greek mythology, but it does also occur in other mythologies, especially when it comes to female supernatural figures. So examples of this are Hecate's sisters. So you have Hecate, Artemis, and Selene. You have Hecate herself being a three-headed goddess. The Gorgon sisters, Medusa, Thano, and Eurale. The Furies, also sometimes called the Erinyes, Alecto, Megaera, and Tisiphone. Then you also have the Fates, which we know as Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos. And interestingly, the Fates and their characteristics are also found in Norse mythology, called the Norns, where they weave the Fates and so forth. So all of these, they fall under this three-lady archetype that you'll find very commonly. It's just something to think about, something I'm going to dig a little deeper, and we'll probably talk about that at some point, probably a podcast or something. So another story that mentions Mormo, it's a more modern story, 1925, H.P. Lovecraft wrote a story called The Horror Red Hook. And in this story, he references Hippolytus, but it's darker and more sexualized. So I'm going to do the reading. Now, in the story itself, there are parentheticals that have auditory mood invoking things, such as there's a hideous howl that bursts forth. Here, nameless sounds vied with morbid shriekings. A high whistling sigh occurs. Short, sharp cries from myriad throats, sighs and flute notes. So he's trying to evoke these sounds and visuals as well with this story. O friend and companion of night, thou who rejoicest in the baying of dogs and spilt blood, who wanderest in the midst of shades among the tombs, who longest for blood and brings terror to mortals, Gorgo, Mormo, thousand-faced moon, look favorably on our sacrifices. Then, as the chant closed, the general shout went up, and hissing sounds nearly drowned the croaking and cracked bass organ. Then a gasp from many throats and the babble of barked and bleated words. Lilith, great Lilith, behold the bridegroom. More cries, a clamor of rioting, and the sharp clicking footfalls of a running figure. So short little excerpt there from Lovecraft concerning the Mormo, which I found to be pretty cool. And if you're so inclined and haven't, you should check that out. Put a link down below for you to take a look. And the last thing, I've talked about the three, the Empusa, the Strix, and the Mormo. I am going to briefly mention the Gorgon. Now, the Gorgon doesn't have any direct ties to the vampire, but it is sometimes intertwined with Lamia. And as you've seen in some of these other references, it does get brought up. I'm just going to make the brief mention for those of you who may or may not know what the Gorgon is. It's a creature in Greek mythology, most often referring to the three sisters, Medusa, Euryale, and Stheno. They're said to have hair venomous snakes and horrifying faces, which turn people to stone that look upon them. Their origins, they're mentioned as early, or we see evidence of them as early as 1194, 1184 BC. Often you would see they would, on vases or other items that they wanted to keep safe, they would put the visage of the Gorgon to protect it, because people believed if you looked upon its face that you would be turned to stone. Interestingly, very recently, there was a statue that was just over a meter tall, found in city Parroquia, and they found this in 1993, so it hasn't been that long. It's been about less than 30 years, and they uncovered it, and it's from 6th century BC, so it's quite old and quite a find to find something like that so recently, which is pretty cool. And I'll also put a link down at the bottom if you want to check that out. So Gorgons are just other monsters from that particular time, made in references along with the Lamia, Empusa, the Mormo, and also Strix. So we're just starting out here at the beginnings, kind of hanging out in Greece. We're going to talk about some other regions. The things that we're looking for in particular when we're talking about the vampire archetype are creatures that consume blood, consume flesh of humans for whatever their reasons might be, food or fun, I don't know. In this case, so far we've talked about these creatures are all female, some being specters, some being corporeal, used as bugbears to frighten children or keep people in, in good behavior. And as we get through some of the next ones, we'll see a little bit more about how things sort of evolve. So I'm glad you guys came. Thanks for watching, and I hope you learned something. If you've got any comments that you want to leave me, absolutely put those down at the bottom. I want to hear from all of you. If you want to drop some knowledge on me, I'm all about it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you'll know when new videos are coming out. We've got some stuff coming up As I mentioned in one of my previous videos, we are going to Vegas here in about a week and a half now. The trip's coming up pretty soon. We're going to a vampire salon, Babylon, down in Vegas. It's our first time being there. We're going to do a little video of some prep, getting ready, getting things put together, and then of course we're going to take you guys along with us, and we're going to vlog as we're there. We'll probably do some live events and things while we're hanging out. So I'm going to meet some really cool people. I'm very excited, and as always, stay spooky, and we'll see you next time.